Welcome to Film Independent Presents, our year-round screening Q&A series, now virtual. I'm Brian Sheen with Film Independent. Thank you so much for joining us to talk all things The Killing of Two Lovers from Neon. First off, I'd like to thank some of our ardent supporters, our lead sponsor, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our screening partner, Vision Media. Today we have a special guest moderator in writer Josh Olson. And without further ado, I will let him take it away from here.
Oh, hi, welcome. One of the joys of being, I guess, an amateur at this thing is I only do this for movies I really like. So if you see my face, I'm endorsing it. But it's really, I just saw this film a few days ago and was just knocked out by it. And it's really a thrill to be able to sit down with all of you guys and talk to you. We've got the director, Robert Machoian, and the two leads of the film, Clayne Crawford and Sepideh Moafi. So thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I just have some sort of general questions from watching it. I guess, Robert, I'll sort of start with you, but what was, and you wrote it as well.
Yeah.
I sometimes this question is fascinating. Sometimes it annoys the hell out of people, so I apologize in advance. But what was the inspiration for the story? And was there some? Was it just kind of a thing that popped into your head?
Yeah. So my wife and I have been married now. We're coming up on 21 years.
Wow.
And we, some of the kids are starting to be teenagers. And I was reading some art. Well, some of my friends at the same age of me were separating. And I was reading this article that was talking about, it was titled The Drift, and it was talking about this period of a relationship where the dialogue starts to be more about the children between the husband and wife, or, you know, the couple, and less about the individuals and what their aspirations are. And it was justifying that why outside of the first 2 years of being married, that's where the highest divorce rate is. And then the second spike is when the children move out of the house. And I was like, I started to freak out. You know, I was like, oh no, you know, I'm analyzing the conversations that I'm having with Rebecca and trying to figure out if we're in this danger space, because you're unaware of it. And so I started to really kind of think about that and to write about it. And then at this kind of same time, Jonah, the younger one, started kindergarten. And so, and the result of that was, and my wife had kind of chosen to be home when they were little like that, was that this door was opening, and she's just so talented. She could really do whatever it is she wants to do. And that door started to kind of open about what she wanted to explore and pursue career-wise. And that was another kind of thing. So that started to kind of spark Nikki's character and what she was exploring, and that really was the kernel of the writing of this thing.
Interesting. And how long did it take you to write?
I had written, so I had been trying to work with Clayne for, it was like, I don't know, almost 10 years of me bugging him about stuff and I not being able to get anybody to finance anything I was writing as related to features. And I had written him a short, which was just the date scene. And I was like, we could at least make this, right? Like, this should be doable. It's like on a block. And I had sent it to him, which he responded to it, and some things were opening up for him. And he was like, can you spread this out into something that's greater than just this short? Because there's a lot of possibility here for something more. And I said, yes. And so I started writing. I think it took me about 2.5 months to kind of piece it all together.
Got it. And was that scene, that's what you mean, the one where they're sitting in the truck talking and
Yeah,
the new guy is outside with the flowers? That was one of those things that feels so specific. Did that come from anything, or was that just kind of an inspired piece of creative writing?
Yeah, for the most part, it was an inspired piece of creative writing, but it was also, you know, well, you know, as a writer, you just sit, people talk around you thinking it's just arbitrary, and it's never arbitrary, right? It's always like, that's going in the data bank. Yeah. And so it was from a series of some of my friends who were struggling in their relationships. I was really asking what they were going through and experiences that we're having, and imagining kind of those experiences And I had a few of my friends were in a space where they were dating their wives again. They had separated and they were really trying to go back to the basics. And so I really grabbed towards that. And I mean, in my writing in general, I try and be so very specific in hopes that people will feel I felt very honored that I had succeeded when my brother was like, I've had that conversation with my wife. And I was like, okay, I got it.
Right. Right. Well, Clayne, let's go to you. So you read this scene. When you pushed Robert to turn it into a feature, were you seeing anything in your head of where it ended up? Did you expect that it was going to open with your character standing over people's bed with a gun in his hand, or was that?
No, I did not anticipate that. I loved the idea of not knowing why they separated. I loved the idea of just being in this world, and I certainly. I mean, look. Honestly, my first intention was we can't do a whole lot with a short, you know. And if we're gonna go shoot a short, why not shoot a film? And I felt that Robert had been making shorts for so long, and he had made a couple of features that I loved, and so it was more from that. And then yeah, I was really curious just to see how these characters, and it was not the scene in the car, the date scene that Robert had written. It was the scene when I show up to pick up the kids and the boyfriend is in the house.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Robert was just curious. We kind of been talking about, masculinity in this country, and how does it affect your children if you're beaten up by the boyfriend, and how does that change the dynamic of the family, even with there being a separation. So it intrigued me, and I was curious to kind of see where Robert could go with it, and it was just more of a question: do you think you can? I think I asked him in August, and then he had a draft to me in October.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Seppi, what was your connection to? Did you know Robert beforehand, or did you just come into this when you saw the script? And if so, what was the what was your first reaction to the script?
I came into this because Clayne actually,
okay.
yeah. So the casting director from Rectify knows me and my work well. So when Clayne went to her and said, "This is what I'm looking for," this is all Clayne's story. She said, "I know, I have someone in mind," and she showed him a tape. And so Clayne then reached out and sent the script. And when I read the script, it was like exactly the type of work, the aesthetic, everything that I believe in and that I want to be working on, that I want to be doing. So yeah, it was really beyond exciting for me.
And did you guys do any work together before you started shooting in terms of kind of building there's just something, and I understand you both do this thing called acting where you sort of pretend to be other people. I sort of have figured a little bit out about that in 30 years. I'm still working on it, but there was such a comfort and ease that you all had that fit with the nature of the relationship. Did you spend time together kind of building that, or was it just that you had a familiarity with each other already? It was just, it really felt natural.
Look, we were in a small town, Josh. So I think it was population 350, and there's nothing in either direction for like 45 minutes. So it's truly this little isolated bubble. So we didn't have any other choice but to get to know one another, And as a result of this town being about a mile long from one end of the street to the other, we could just kind of walk to the locations every day. And Robert's children were playing the kids. So we were all kind of just camping together in this little town. So we would just, whether it was driving the truck around and getting the dialogue, or Seppi and I driving the truck around for date night and just running the lines until, when I put it into part, she said, "Are you going to get your own place?" And just finding those beats, and then just having Robert there, it was just such an unusual circumstance because we were all in this bubble, and yeah, we only had 12 days, but I felt that we had more time than I've probably ever had on another film as it relates to preparation for the actual scene itself. I felt like we had a very clear understanding before we rolled camera, each scene.
We did sit down, I think I was maybe the last one, or was it Chris was the last one to get into town, but we had like 2 days of hefty table work. like we sat down and we talked, and it wasn't like we talked about the script, but we also just talked, we got to know each other. Cause yeah, I didn't really know Clayne at all. We had a couple conversations over the phone. I didn't know Robert besides a couple conversations on the phone. So we just, and I think that because of the isolation that Clayne is talking about, everything felt like time stood still. So everything felt longer than it actually was. So those however many hours felt like we were a lot more productive than, you know, if we were on a regular set or doing a, you know, a production in a big city.
Got it. And I should have noticed this in the credits, but I didn't, because I was going to ask, and also one of our audience asked too, about where you found those amazing kid actors, but you made them. So how had your kids been in? They must have been. Obviously, you've thrown them in front of a camera before. Is that correct?
Yeah, they've always been. I mean, they still are. They're pitching. They've got a horror film. They've got me, you know, needing to make. They've got, you know, an action adventure film. They've got, you know, but they. I had made a film, God Bless a Child, with them years ago. Jonah was, I think, I don't even know if he was one at the time. They had a real interest. They had a real drive to want to be in acting. And then in 2019, I made a film with them called The Miners, where Ezra and Jonah and Ari they actually asked me to make that movie. They were like, "Hey, we want to do some stuff. Would you make it?" And so I said, "Yeah." And we made this little short film with them, and they were very serious. And I didn't realize, to be honest, until The Killing of Two Lovers, how serious they take acting. You think like, oh, these are just kids and they're mine, you know, and so there's that. But even like Jonah, for example, from the day he met Seppi on, he just sat in her lap and would fall asleep every night with her. And it was like they embraced. He gets mad now because he gave Seppi a kiss, and they're always like, "Oh, the girl first kiss with Seppi," and he was really in the moment, and so he gets really like frustrated about that, because he was like, she was playing my mother, though, you know.
And then we saw you at Sundance, and he ran away from you the whole time.
Yeah. But I didn't realize that they really worked out a lot of the beats. I had to start respecting them as actors on this set, because they were very, very serious about what was happening, and they're very serious about their scenes. But the thing I've always loved about them, and why I probably leaned into them, because they're very comfortable with the way that they touch and they climb and they crawl all over each other. And I feel like those things are so very necessary, and they're often void in movies that deal with kids, is really like how much siblings like touch each other.
Yeah, the scene where they all climb into the pickup together there was just something so real about that. Plus the fact that they inexplicably had, was it blue or green hair? That was no, it's wonderful. Well, that answered that question. Were they demanding off camera as well? Or were they easy to work with?
Overall, they're relatively easy to work with. The only demands I really get from them, which is just funny, is that Kanosh they had one mercantile that made sandwiches, which we often ate because it was the only place to eat food. They believe it's the best sandwiches they've ever eaten in their life. They still once a month demand that I drive. It's a 2.5 hour drive that I drive down there and get them these sandwiches, which I have not satisfied, but they still demand it. Other than that, no. I mean, they're very serious about making work. It's very interesting. The pressure I feel right now from them being like, they're working out this action adventure film pretty consistently, and every walk to the grocery store is like, okay, this is how we get lost. Yeah.
It sounds like a blessing and a curse. How tight, since we're talking about this, like how tight was the script? Were you are you one of those Mammoty guys where it's like every line as written? Or yeah, for some reason the rocket scene gave me huge anxiety. I try not to watch movies this way, but I've been on enough sets, and I kept thinking, oh God, what happened? Because this is a long take with these kids being very natural with their father. And I thought, like, what happens if the rocket doesn't go off or something? But it all feels very natural. Are the scenes tightly scripted, or do you kind of let them play while they're, and the adults too, I mean?
Yeah, I mean, the script is tightly written, but I often look at it in this, you know, it's like I'm doing as much homework as I can so that the actors understand the intentions of why I've written the things that I've written. But I'm open in the context of, as long as the actors understand the intention of the scenes. Like, an example would be like the argument with David and Seppi, the kind of big argument at the end. There's a lot of ebb and flows that are happening because I wanted David to, his inappropriateness to continue building, as opposed to just come out of the gate being an asshole. Because I was like, we have to empathize with this guy who's trapped, and we have to empathize with Nikki, who's trapped in between two people she loves. And so it's like, actually, to her, both of these individuals are great human beings, and she loves both of them. And so the writing is really to get at those things. But I really want the actors to have the fluidity that if things feel right to say, or movements feel right, they're so talented. I'm just trying to access that as well. So it's a mix of both.
Sure. And the town, it was in Utah, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
How did you find it?
I had been down there. There's a famous painter, Brian Kirchiznik, who lives in Provo, and I had found out from a friend of mine that he lived in Kanosh for a long period of time and had an art studio down there. And I had shot a short film. I had been a cinematographer on a short film down there, and just loved the art space, and asked if I could go down there and write. And so I was writing a project down there. And Clayne and I were talking about work, and I walked by that red brick house, and I just knew we would make a movie here. And the importance of the town in of itself, like what happens when you have marital problems in a town of 300, was very interesting to me, because there's these histories that I felt were very important to exist, especially even the thing I knew I really wanted is the opening of the film, which is I wanted David, where he was staying proximity wise, to be a block away. The fact that you could stand on your parents' doorstep and watch the person you love the most dating somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how helpful was being in that place to your performances, Seppi and Clayne? I mean, it feels, I don't want to say it's unique. That seems kind of patronizing. It's a place I've never been to. I've been to a lot of places, but there's something about that town that felt unique, very isolated. Did that help you in your performance, kind of absorb the characters?
That was everything. And that's what, for me at least, going into anything, I mean, I want to be prepared for any situation, shooting situation, have enough ready so I can work in any circumstance. But it's like I just didn't feel like working, it didn't feel like I imagine anything or create anything in my mind. It was just literally, from the caliber of actors like Clayne and Chris. You read the script, you understand the character, you understand the script, and then I wish that every project could be that easy, where you can just walk in and just respond.
And did you say you actually walked to the set every day? Was that from where you were staying?
Yeah, I mean, you can walk.
So were you guys staying in houses? I can't imagine there's a big giant Hyatt just off camera in any of those scenes. So were you staying in the houses there? Or?
There's one motel.
Okay.
And with
3
like
rooms.
4 rooms. Yeah, 3 rooms.
Oh
Chris,
my God.
I had 1 room, and then our producers and Clayne and everyone stayed in a house. But we all ended up spending a lot of like family time at the house too.
Wow. No, it's an amazing location.
Yeah.
Robert, there's 2 other things I want to ask you about before we jump to the audience. But one is just I loved your use of the frame, the Academy aspect. Actually, somebody else asked about that, and I was wondering, do you lean towards that with your work, or is that something specific to this? Because it gave it this sort of beautiful sense of both how important everything was to the characters, and yet how small they are in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I've shot in different aspect ratios. I normally lean on 1/66 as like the aspect ratio I really like. And when we kind of safety framed for this film, 1/66 was the choice that we framed for. But I think a lot of it, as I've thought a lot about it, I teach photography, and I spend most of my days critiquing photographs and looking at photographs. And a lot of my students actually photograph families as it relates. And I knew the limited amount of days that I was going to have. And this is really the first time I got an opportunity. I've worked with a lot of they call them non-actors. They're actors, but they just haven't chosen that as their profession. And they're not as crafted as, Seppi and Clayne. And I knew I was getting access to great talent, and I knew the shortness of time. And I was very interested in, could we hold these frames and give these actors these scenes and give them the room to like dealing with such a real an environment that many people deal with, right? Regardless of your economical status, if you're in relationships, you're dealing, whether you're married, not married, or so forth, you're dealing with some aspect of this story. Could it heighten the realism that we were kind of forced to be in that space? The other aspect was really excited about the discomfort. Murch kind of talks about, the frame as like a blink and this release that occurs as you cut frames. And I was really interested. One of the scenes that I really love with Seppi and Clayne is when he's dragging that dummy out. And it's not really a heated argument, but it is an argument of it's almost like Nikki probably shouldn't have just left it alone, but didn't want to. And David should leave it alone, but won't either. And in that moment, you understand why their relationship is having the problems that it's having, and to not allow the audience to kind of leave once they get into the middle of it. I really love, because there's a scene in there where Seppi says, "Can you look at me?" And he's looking away from the camera, and we aren't seeing him, and it's almost like the audience as well is like, we need to know what's happening. What is he processing? And so for me, that was very exciting.
And then for the actors, for you guys, this is a terrible thing to ask people. The movie is what it is, and people should take away what they take away from it. But for you personally, what do you think about the ending? Do these characters feel healthy to you at the end of this thing? Is there concern in your part? Do you feel like, because it's an interesting way that they end up back together. And it's one of the things I love about the film is that you're sort of, we're so trained by Hollywood to be rooting for the couple to get back together and the family unit to get back together. But there's this kind of uncomfortable aspect to their relationship, from, say, him standing over the bed with a gun to the way they end up back together. Do you have hope for these two? Seppi, how about you first, I guess?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly real. I mean, we all have these part sides to us, and this is something that I love about this movie, is that it's not like, okay, the good couple, the bad couple, the good guy, the bad guy. It's like everybody's just a human being trying to get what they want and love who they love and be free, happy in their ways. And so at the end, I don't know, I like that it ends on that note of ambiguity and not knowing, and being able to imagine, like allowing the audience to kind of go on, because it's not a happy ending at all. It's kind of just open. And so you get to imagine, are they going to fall into that pattern again? Are they going to fall into that cycle again? Or is this going to be traumatic enough of an event for them to, move on from and actually work on their stuff? I don't know. I think it's real. And that's all I could ask for a film or for an ending. So
yeah, no, absolutely. How about you, Clayne? What's your do you have hope for these two?
Little hope, right, for these two, but I think it was a poetic ending, and I think it's true to life. Robert had mentioned someone in his family who simply couldn't get a divorce because they couldn't afford it, right? And I think sometimes I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine earlier, how my grandparents had stayed together for 73 years. My grandpa passed away recently, and that doesn't happen anymore, because at the time they came through the Great Depression, and they had to rely on one another for survival in a lot of ways, right? And I think that the comforts of society and where we've kind of come in this modern world, there's a lot more options than there were 30, 40 years ago. And I think it was interesting to kind of see, because that's what was unique about, you mentioned that word about when you reference the town, and it is this little, it's like a time capsule. We said it was almost like a Norman Rockwell painting. You see groups of kids walking hand in hand to the candy store, right, to get their little bag of candy. And I thought it was interesting to kind of open this film in such a jarring way, and then to kind of just drift into the sunset was just quite poetic and beautiful. But little hope.
Okay. Interesting. Robert, I have one last question, then we'll throw it to the audience. I love the film. I watched it. I'm sitting here wondering, did I? I'm half joking. Did I miss a scene, or are there no lovers actually killed in the film?
You missed a scene.
Yeah.
I feel like you promised me something, and
Yeah, I had at one of our screenings that had a guy very upset that that somebody hadn't died. But of course, it was motivated by my brother-in-law had told me one time he was really struggling with my sister's ex-husband, and really wanted to beat the crap out of him. And one of the things he had said to me was like, the second that I did that, that would be it. I would no longer be with your sister, and I can't do that. I can't risk that. And that's what I was very, Derek is actually doing the right thing in his mind, but the result is a loving relationship ended as a result of that, Yeah. So people didn't physically die, but.
No, but it's an interesting way to have that sort of anxiety linger over the audience the entire time, as is the opening shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's lovely. I almost feel guilty asking, because that's the sort of thing you should leave alone and let percolate in the audience.
I mean, he did kill the relationship. That's
yeah. There you go. We've got a few questions from the audience. People are welcome to ask more. Oh, great, Jack McDermott. This is I wanted to ask about this too. Can you talk about the sound design choices? There's some really interesting sound work in there, and some effects that I normally associate with horror films, which kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier.
I can speak to that. I had worked with Peter Albrechtsen on a feature When She Runs that I had done a few years prior, and I just got 1 or 2 days with him. We couldn't afford to pay him really what he was worth, and I walked away from that experience hungry, to be honest. I was like, oh my gosh, I just worked with a sound designer who's unbelievable and not had that experience. And when I started to write The Killing of Two Lovers, I actually emailed him and said very specifically, I need you to work on this project. I'm going to write this project so that you're on it. And he was kind of like, yeah, because as things unfold. And then we went and shot it, and then I followed that email up. Now I've made this film that you need to be involved in. And then again, I edited this film you need to be involved in. And I was very, very interested. We had started to explore some things in the previous film with how sound design could affect the emotional state of the character. How could we get the idea of the inside of a character through the sound design? And so when I wrote this, I really wanted us to understand what David was dealing with. So the farther he gets away from his children and from Nikki, the more his life begins to unravel. And how could we do that without having these scenes that are needing to express that? And one of the things that Peter came up with, which I really loved, was he had me start getting sound, asking me to film around the town, just the audio, and send it to him. And the result of that is he started to think about what David was around on a regular basis. And so he began to build the sound design around objects or things that would be common in David's life. So the sound of like metal, like chinking metal, for example. He's like, do you know that that car door, the truck door opens and closes 84 times in this film outside of what he ended up adding. So he was like, think about how often David hears those sounds and the sounds of the metal and the sounds of creaking. And because this character is this like kind of handyman that like does removals and does build-ins, he thought a lot about everything that David would experience, and then began to build that into his world as the sounds that he would hear, as the anxiety and the frustration and the strain on being away from the life he was used to.
Yeah, that was great. The we've got a couple, actually two people have asked sort of similar questions. Both Corey and Rodrigo Castellanos Araya are, Jacoby Pavlica. Sorry, if I'm getting your names wrong. But they're both asking about the sort of, there's a precision to the shooting and the editing. And something I wonder about too is how planned out was this going in terms of the shots and the cutting and so forth? Did you storyboard?
Disturbingly planned out. It was amazing.
Was it?
Are immaculate. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, that's so funny. And do they look like the final shots? I mean, were they?
They just, I mean, they're a work of art. They need to be up at MoMA. They're amazing. It's true.
Yeah, I have a stack of stuff. I don't know if I have them here, but I think they're at home now. But because of the shortness of time, I knew we'd have to. I don't normally storyboard. I really like to actually, if I had my dream of dreams, it would be spending a day really with the actors in the space, and then eventually figuring out how their performances and how I could move the camera in relationship to that. But knowing that we had such limited time and space, I've never had to be so exact in a film ever. And so I storyboarded all of it, and we almost shot, I keep referencing like Brothers McMullen, because Ed Burns talked about how he's like, there's not much past the cut, because, and I think in this context, there wasn't much past it in the scenes as well. I mean, it was pretty risky in many ways, but I was excited. Like the drive around, the date night scene, driving around the block. See, for me, that was exciting. I was like, this scene should last a minute and a half. That's me from the filmmaker standpoint. But then that forces the actors to know there's a minute and a half, and there's not a minute and a half of dialogue. So what's going to happen as we drive around that block? For me, that was really exciting. And that risk aspect, that was neat for me, because when I was editing this thing, it was just like getting so excited because I could watch each scene by themselves,
And were you editing while you shot, or was it?
No, they didn't even allow time. I think I successfully made dailies for like a day. Then
Got it. By the way, who wrote the song?
Me. I wrote that.
Was it? Okay. Clayne, have you? I apologize. I should know this. Have you sung professionally? Was that a?
No, I don't like to sing, which is why Robert has me sing.
Oh,
we just
wonderful.
finished the film a couple of weeks ago, and again, I'm singing.
That's great. Oh, that was terrific. But when you guys, Sepideh and Clayne, what when you saw the film for the first time, did anything surprise you? Did anything jump out at you as not what you expected, or?
A lot of gratitude, right? This was the first time that I'd ever taken. I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and Robert and I have been trying to do it together, as he had said, for almost 10. And this was, in a lot of ways, we didn't set out to go make a film that everyone was going to see. In a lot of ways, it was an experiment to see if we could work together, and how was that relationship going to be on set, and could we make something together that was great or worth watching. So when Robert sent me the first cut, it was in black and white with no sound, and I was blown away, just full of gratitude that I knew, we had been trying to get people to fund our films for so long, and I knew what Robert was capable of. So to actually see it materialize, special is the only word I can think of for that moment when I watched it for the first time.
Great. Sepideh, how about you? What was your?
Yeah, I mean, I was floored. I was blown away when I watched the first cut, and that also was without sound and color and everything. But I remember watching it for the first time, like when we saw it at Sundance, and it's the first time in my entire life where I've watched something that I've been involved in, and I've been an audience member, like completely. There wasn't one like, oh, this was what was happening on the day, or this is what I was thinking, or this is what we were talking about before. None of that. Just completely taken with the story, with the character storyline, with everything. So, I mean, that's like, if that's not mission accomplished, then that's, and not, I don't mean I just mean from a film standpoint, to have your actors so immersed in the story as if they don't know what's going to happen.
No.
yeah, I'm just blown away. And I didn't know I could get more blown away after seeing the rough cut. So that was really, yeah, special.
That's fantastic. What is the what's the release plan for this, Robert? Where will people? I mean, obviously everyone here has seen it, but where will folks be catching this in the near future?
Yeah, I know that Neon acquired a film. They're hoping, excitingly, they're hoping to do a theatrical on it, and they had talked to us just recently about being able to do a theatrical release. There have been some discussions of it being released in February, which I think is the initial plan, but with COVID, they may push it to May in hopes that the vaccine will be out and people will be able to see it in theaters, which, you know, every filmmaker wants their films seen in theater. I can only imagine, right? And maybe this is a little bit arrogant on my part, but I had thought that some people said that, and then they shot the whole movie in close-ups, and I was like, no, that's okay to watch on a 70-inch monitor with, you know, Bose speakers. I shot wider in hopes to really be in the theater, because to be honest, for me, in these arguments, who's more important, you know, Nikki or David? It's like neither one. So I was like, I want to shoot these wide shots, so whatever David's doing, you can see how Nikki's reacting to that, instead of me cutting to her reaction, because then I am deciding what emotion is really important in that scene. And so some of those wide shots is because they both are important. It's kind of meant, like, when again, Sundance is the first place I got to see it on a large screen like that, and I was like, it really lives here, because when you're watching David trying desperately to get his daughter to calm down, you're also watching the three boys be so uncomfortable and not know what to do, and you're able to actually move around in that space. So I really hope that we're able to do a theatrical in that way. And the sound design really was built for 5.1, and he would have done Atmos if we could have afforded it, which would have been cool.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Well, that is, well, there's somebody asked a question that I'm this is a general one, but it's back to the framing again. But I have noticed more, I'm thinking like First Cow this year and one or two other movies in the last year or two that are going back to this kind of framing, which is really interesting. I get Lighthouse did that as well, I suppose. Do you think there's something happening? Is there a trend, or is it just that things are getting freer and people are able to kind of do more of what they want creatively?
Yeah, there's a liberation that's occurring. I mean, I jokingly say Michael Bay, if you watch Transformers, like, he's all over the place in aspect ratios constantly. I think he gives characters aspect ratios, which I think is interesting. But I do think there's a liberation that people are really kind of exploring. From a photographic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to me to be switching and shifting aspect ratios, because you get the ability to tell your stories differently, how you frame. You know, I read once with that film, that low budget film Monster, they were asking why they framed 2:3, and he was like, because it's easier to frame and we don't have a lot of money, so 2:3 just looks more beautiful, which it does, because it has more of that landscape aspect. For me, I really want to confine David's world. And we did the 166, which we use in the argument. When Derek enters the frame, we're 166, but the 4:3 just felt like David has no understanding of his future at all. So this you know, crushing his frame allows him not to see very much farther into his future. And Nikki doesn't really know either on many levels. It's like all of a sudden she's learning that she's a lot smarter and a lot more talented than she really anticipated. And all of a sudden it's like, how far do I push this? And so the framing felt very kind of important as I explored it. And I think filmmakers really, I think we moved past the trend of 4:3, and I hope we're moving into aspect ratios that are chosen.
Yeah.
And it's okay to choose them and not feel like you're like a hipster because you chose
it. Right, exactly. No, it really, really works for this film. I was just constantly astonished by what a great job it did of sort of containing their worlds, and lovely stuff. Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to come talk to us. It's a wonderful film. You've answered some questions from the audience. People have clearly enjoyed it. Hopefully looking for this in February. Hopefully looking for this in theaters, man. That would be great. I would love
Yeah.
to
Yeah, that's the
sit in a theater and see a movie again. I kind of remember what that was like.
hope. Yeah, agreed.
Yes. Well, thank you all very much
Thank
for
you.
being here. This was great.